I refused to pay for my daughter's dream wedding. She cut me off, invited me to a reconciliation dinner, then pulled out lawyers. I'm Emily. If you've read my last post, you know a little of my backstory. Worked since I was 16, paid my own way through school, bought a house on my own, and learned the value of saying no when it matters. This is not about that house. This is about my daughter, Lily, and how a choice I made to protect our family finances turned into something I never expected. Lily turned 22 this past spring. She's bright, loud, and dramatic in the best ways, the kind of person who fills a room the moment she walks in. She's also exactly the kind of person who grew up in a house where most of the safety nets were built by me and occasionally by mom and dad, who, yes, have their own complicated relationship with money. You may remember them. Lily has always liked the idea of big moments, prom dresses she had to save for in high school, a graduation party that her friends gossiped about. I never mind giving gifts when I could. I never believed spoiling her would teach responsibility. I tried to model it differently. She met Jason this summer after she turned 20. I liked him right away, kind, steady, a little nerdy. They fell hard and fast, and soon there was talk about a wedding. Not a backyard potluck with fairy lights. Not even a nice little ceremony at a courthouse. She talked about the sort of wedding you see in movies: rented estate, designer dress, 4-course meal, and an open bar that would make the caterers swoon. Everything would be perfect. Jason's family, bless them, have money. Lily's words at first were, "We can do it ourselves," and then slowly shifted to, "Mom, could you help?" It would mean so much. I want to be clear, I love my daughter. I would give her the world if I could. But I also know the weight of debt. I know how quickly joy can turn into years of interest and missed opportunities. I made a choice based on that, and that choice began a chain of events that fractured our family and ended with me in a house where 3 lawyers were waiting over a reconciliation dinner. A little context, because this is where people usually skip to the outrage. I didn't become financially careful because I enjoy spreadsheets. I learned to be careful because I once had nothing and I swore not to go back. Those diner shifts, scholarships, and per diem hospital gigs weren't just hardship theater. They were the scaffolding I used to build a life that didn't collapse the moment something unexpected happened. When Lily was little, my finances were erratic. There were months I juggled bills and made ration grocery runs. When the house I owned became a reality, it wasn't because I was cold or obsessed with thrift. It was a promise to myself that I wouldn't leave my child vulnerable to the kind of financial scrambling I grew up with. That meant building an emergency fund, putting retirement on the calendar, and treating large gifts or loans with caution. You can love someone and still say no to a request that will hurt your future. So when Lily first brought up a wedding that would be tens of thousands of dollars, my brain lit up with all the letdowns I'd seen from others. New homeowners who couldn't afford repairs, friends who postponed medical care because of wedding payments, people drowning in loans used for a single day of spectacle. I sat her down and laid out numbers, a realistic budget, what I could reasonably help with, a dress, flowers, maybe a portion of the venue, and what she would need to fund herself. It wasn't a lecture. I offered options. I suggested scaling back, doing a weekday ceremony, or focusing resources on a savings account rather than a single event. I offered to help plan a beautiful but financially sane wedding. I told her I would never abandon her on a special day, but I wouldn't mortgage our future for it. My choices weren't about control, they were about protection. Problem was that protection, in her eyes, looked like betrayal. Complication, and I mean this in the most adult, measured way, was Jason's family. They're well-off, generous types with opinions about what a proper wedding should look like. I met them, I liked them, and they liked me. They hosted an engagement dinner, and honestly, it was lovely. But beneath the lovely were expectations that felt gently coercive. The expectation that people like us throw a certain kind of celebration. Lily absorbed that. She started sharing Pinterest boards with extravagant captions and sent me private messages about how much more meaningful the day would be if we could do it right. I didn't begrudge Jason's family wanting a beautiful event. I respected that they might contribute. I also knew dynamics. When 2 families with different resources join, someone usually ends up carrying more than they intended. Lily began telling me she felt defensive in front of Jason's parents when I insisted on a budget. Those are the moments where a child, even a grown one, hears you not as a protector but as an obstacle. Suddenly, the conversation shifted away from numbers into feelings. She started to frame my caution as judgment. I valued safety over beauty, prudence over memory-making. She said more than once that I was cheap. Those words cut, not because they were accurate, but because they came from someone who'd seen how I scratched nights and paid tuition. I tried to explain. I wasn't asking her to have a sad day. I was asking her to have a secure life. I offered again to help plan, to negotiate with vendors, to call in favors. I volunteered to help sift through venues and find something that felt special but didn't require a second mortgage. The more practical I became, the more distant she grew. There was a specific day when I said no in a way she couldn't parse as anything but refusal. We were at my kitchen table, spreadsheets open, and she slid an itemized estimate across the table. Venue, photographer, band, floral installation, rehearsal dinner, and, I swear to you, a chocolate fountain that would require its own staff. Total was shocking to anyone who didn't live in the world of flashy weddings, and even for those who did, it was a lot. I could have said, let's talk to Jason's parents, or maybe we can phase some things. I tried. I explained my limits and offered alternatives for the same emotional punch at a fraction of the price. I suggested doing a smaller ceremony and saving the big celebration for an anniversary. I offered to pay for things that meant the most to her emotionally, like her dress, professional photos, or a florist on a tight budget who'd do wonders with seasonal blooms. Instead of meeting me halfway, Lily picked a battle line. She told me she'd rather not have me involved if I couldn't give what she saw as support. She said I was putting my own comfort above her happiness. The language changed from negotiation to ultimatum. 2 days after that conversation, she posted on Instagram a painfully edited video of her and Jason laughing with the caption, "Dreams cost money. Friends and family who don't help will still celebrate without you." Comments were a mix of sympathy and passive-aggressive praise. It stung. Then she stopped answering my calls. Texts went unanswered. My offers to help plan, things I would have loved to do, were met with silence. That's when I realized this wasn't just a financial disagreement, it had become a boundary conflict she chose to escalate by shutting me out. When someone you love goes public with an argument, it becomes something else entirely. For Lily, the narrative became, mother refuses to support daughter's dream wedding. For me, it was a complicated set of decisions made with care. First, it was friends who privately messaged me because you can't help but reach out to the parent in these moments. Then a few mutual acquaintances sent screenshots of comments where people assumed I had said I'd never support Lily financially. Someone even contacted my sister Jess, the one who reconciled with me after the house drama, and asked if I was really that kind of mom. The tone of the internet and the small-town comment threads turned the dispute into gossip. It wasn't just strangers. Jason's cousin made a post about boundaries and privilege that mentioned my name. A local blogger posted a clickbaity piece. When parents don't pay for weddings, who's in the wrong? The piece framed me as the villain who refused. We were suddenly a story. My phone buzzed with messages that popped like tiny knives. How could you? She deserves a magical day. You're ruining her chance. My own inbox had admirers of Lily who wanted to console an embattled bride. Inside the house, Lily never answered. My texts went unread. I stood on my porch and felt the odd loneliness of being publicly shamed by your own child. I didn't call the press. I didn't respond in anger. I texted her once, a simple message. I'll always love you. If you want me at the wedding, call me. Nothing. Days turned to weeks. The silence was a living thing in our home. There are different kinds of cuts. One is when people argue and cool off. Another is when someone deliberately removes you from their life as a means of punishment. I hoped Lily would come around. I kept being practical. I continued to show up to work, pay bills, and keep my life from being a telenovela. But a week became 2 weeks, and a voicemail from her sister-in-law, who'd been neutral, said, "She's decided she doesn't want contact for now." I tried different approaches. I sent handwritten letters, which is so on-brand for me. I like the permanence of ink. I asked mutual friends to encourage her to call. I offered to attend a wedding planning meeting if that would help. But every outreach was met with silence or short, clipped replies from Jason saying she needed space. Then came the day I realized things were worse than estrangement. My daughter, who had been pregnant and had given birth to my grandson a little earlier than I expected, that's another part of the tangled timeline, began limiting my visits. First, it was reasonable, sleep cycles and newborn exhaustion. Then it became directives from Lily. We're doing things our way. When our grandson Miles was born, I was overjoyed and I tried to support quietly, meals, laundry, and offer to babysit. Those offers were politely declined. A month after she cut me off, my sister Jess texted me, worried. "Does Lily know you want to be in Miles's life?" she asked. I wrote back, "I would move mountains to be with him." Jess's reply made my stomach drop. She says she's protecting Miles from people who would teach the wrong values. She means you. Those words were a cold kick. My own child, who I'd raised to be resilient and loving, had decided that my financial caution made me unfit in her eyes. It was unbearable. 3 weeks into the cold silence, I received a text that read, "Family reconciliation dinner, Saturday, 7 p.m. Please come." It was curt, like so many of her messages had been lately. I asked which restaurant and whether there would be others. Her reply, "It's at our place. It'll be just family." I debated. My therapist, Rachel, "Yes, therapy is back on my calendar," advised caution. "Trust your instincts," she said. "If it smells like manipulation, prepare." I texted Jess and asked if she knew anything. Jess, bless her, said she'd come with me. I considered not going. But part of me thought maybe this was a thawing moment. Maybe Lily had a change of heart. Maybe she wanted to explain herself. Maybe there would be hugs and we'd go home with new plans for the wedding, or at least a pathway to being in Miles's life. When Lily emailed a digital invite with a vintage family photo and the word reconciliation, I took it as a chance. I put on something simple but kind, drove to their house, and hoped for the best. I should have asked more questions. I should have brought a friend. But I went because it was my child asking. 'Cause despite everything, my heart wanted to be in the room. What happened next is the thing everyone remembers. 3 lawyers at the table, a handful of papers, and a sentence from Lily that I still hear when I'm washing dishes. Sign over power of attorney or you'll never see Miles again. Let me describe the room because details matter. It was tidy in that curated way young parents make spaces feel like Pinterest boards. Succulents, a fur throw, framed prints of travel photos. There were candles unlit, because everyone knows candles read well in photos but can be a hazard with a newborn. There were 7 people I recognized and 3 I didn't. The 3 others were the lawyers, navy suits, well-practiced neutral faces, and a stack of documents in front of them. It wasn't exactly what I expected from a family dinner. There was no roast chicken on the table, no wine decanters being passed. Instead, Lily stood and made a small speech about family unity and protecting the future. Then she slid a paper toward me and said without theatrics, "This is a power of attorney. Sign it, and we can consolidate decision-making for Miles's care and our finances while we travel for Jason's work. Don't sign, and we will have to consider who else is suitable." I blinked because legal coercion seemed like something out of a daytime drama. I asked, "What does this POA cover exactly?" One of the lawyers explained it in legalese that made my head swim. Lily then said, quiet but hard, "We're giving you the choice. To either sign voluntarily or we'll pursue it through other channels. You know how this town talks. You know what people will say. But if you refuse, we'll have to make decisions without you." The implication was clear. Sign this document, concede control, or risk being portrayed as an unloving grandmother who had to be kept at arm's length. The line about my grandson was explicit. "You'll never see Miles again." I felt a cold dread bubble up, not really from fear of losing Miles. I knew I could fight, but from the venom of the suggestion that my love could be so easily branded as dangerous. Felt like an ambush. I want to be transparent. I was terrified in that moment. The lawyers had the language of power. Lily had the performance of righteous anger. And those were powerful things in a room full of people who wanted to look like they knew how to do adult things. But I also knew my rights, and I knew the kind of manipulation that uses fear as leverage. I sat down slowly, placed my purse on my lap, and said calmly, "I'm not signing anything under coercion." The room gasped like I'd insulted a sacred object. Lily's jaw tightened. One of the lawyers, a man with silver hair and patience, said, "Mrs. Carter, we've drafted this to ensure continuity. If you cooperate, it will be simple." I replied, "A power of attorney is not a baton to be waved at those you don't like. If you have concerns about custody or visitation, bring them to court. If you wish to modify anything about my involvement with Miles, we can do that properly, through agreement and legal counsel." And then something I hadn't planned. I reached into my purse, dialed a number, and said loud enough for all of them to hear, "Hello, this is Emily Carter. I'm at Lily and Jason's home." I'd like to confirm that a meeting is occurring with 3 attorneys and that my daughter is pressuring me to sign legal documents. I'm recording this call for my attorney. The hush in the room was immediate. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply called my lawyer, Thomas, as I'd agreed with in therapy, because Rachel had suggested preparing for anything. Thomas arrived within an hour. The presence of a neutral legal professional changed the room's tone. Coercive power play lost its edge when it met someone who could translate legalese into rights and obligations. Lily tried to frame it as concern for Miles. I framed it as what it was, a manipulation. The night ended in an argument, but not the sort of performance Lily had hoped for. I know people hate legal talk and emotional threads, but the practical detail here matters. I'd spoken to Thomas the week before after a friend warned me that some family disputes escalate into opportunistic legal maneuvers. I hadn't believed Lily capable of this, but experience had taught me to prepare for unexpected turns. Thomas told me to document everything: texts, voicemails, instances of coercion, and if I had to attend a meeting like that, record it or have an attorney present. So when I dialed Thomas from my car and told him what was happening, he said he'd be there within the hour and told me not to sign anything. When he arrived, he asked to see the documents. He explained the POA options and the fact that one cannot be coerced into signing. Any document signed under duress is contestable. He also reminded me that threatening to withhold a child for leverage could have legal consequences, and that custody decisions are made based on the child's best interest, not vindictive strategy. His presence recalibrated the meeting. The lawyers who'd been so assured suddenly spoke with the measured caution of professionals who'd rather avoid litigation. They explained that what Lily proposed was unusual. Most families use POAs for elderly care or emergencies, not as bargaining chips in domestic disputes. That phrase made something shift in the room, a recognition that what was happening wasn't a normal legal step, it was strategy. We agreed to table any signing. Thomas proposed mediation instead. A neutral setting where concerns about custody, visitation, and the wedding could be discussed without lawyers at the table trying to corner me. Lily stormed out in tears and slammed the door, dramatic and performative, precisely the sort of thing that would read well in a social media clip. But now there was a record. That mattered. Through the night of lawyers, people took sides. Some friends said I'd been cold-hearted for even attending the house meeting. Others praised me for not being bullied into a legal trick. Lily posted a short video about protecting her family and got a lot of sympathy from people who only saw part of the story. Jason's family, who had initially encouraged a grand wedding, had to reckon with their daughter's pivot into legal brinksmanship. The immediate consequence was social. Whispers, a few uncomfortable school of friend invites rescinded for holiday gatherings, and some relatives who sent concerned but pointed messages. The more consequential change was quieter. My friends began dropping by with meals and offers to babysit Miles without drama. A PDA friend, Sarah, offered to knit a baby blanket and told me in a low voice that she'd never seen manipulation like that in these circles. It was comforting and bizarre. Legally, Lily backed off when Thomas explained the exposure to litigation and the moral hazard of using a child as a bargaining chip. The mediation sessions that followed were tense and slow. Lily accused me of being unsupportive, and I listened. I told her, honestly and with as much tenderness as I could muster, that my refusal to bankroll an extravagant wedding was not a moral condemnation of her. It was a refusal to jeopardize our long-term stability. We negotiated. I agreed to sponsor a meaningful part of the day, a venue deposit and a photographer, but only if the overall budget was pared down and saved in a joint account. She agreed reluctantly. It was progress, but fragile. The episode taught me 2 things: that people will weaponize children if they think it will win them what they want, and that having a plan, a lawyer, documentation, witnesses matters. And somewhere in the middle of this ugly mess, I still loved my daughter and was desperate for her to see that I wasn't the enemy. We started therapy, both family sessions and individual work. Lily and I met with a mediator named Claire, who had a gentle style and the confidence of someone who'd seen enough fragile family dynamics to not be surprised by theatrics. In sessions, Lily admitted feeling pressured by appearances and worried that her wedding would be judged. She also admitted that she'd been terrified of not having the big moment she'd imagined since childhood. Those admissions haunted me because they sounded so much like my own younger self, yearning for validation and fearing scarcity. Therapy didn't fix everything overnight. It gave us tools. We learned how to ask for what we needed without making ultimatums. I learned to hold boundaries without making them punishments. Lily learned the mechanics of budgeting and how to negotiate with vendors for reduced costs. We practiced communication through small exercises, asking questions before reacting, using I statements, and scheduling regular check-ins, a sweet little ritual where we'd sit with coffee and talk through the week's stresses. Miles became the center of a new, gentler orbit. Visits were supervised at first, then gradually became routine. I'd babysit for an afternoon, feed him and rock him, and leave before the evening tornado of parenting reasserted itself. Those hours were restorative for me. They weren't dramatic. They were full of small victories. Him learning to roll over, laughing at the weird face I make when I pretend to be a baby monster, the way he would grip my finger with a tiny hand that made my heart unclench. We still had financial talks. Lily and Jason agreed to scale back the wedding. They postponed the big reception to next year and did a small ceremony with close family. I covered the photographer's fee, but only after we agreed on a budget and a payment plan. It wasn't a perfect compromise, but it was a start. We're not a perfect family. We never will be. But we are trying. The wedding is postponed to next August. The couple exchanged vows quietly and had a small meal with 4 guests and a cake from the local bakery that tasted like comfort. Miles came in a sling, sleepy and confused, and at one point he settled on my chest and slept through it all. I cried in a corner, incongruously, because it felt like proof that some parts of life are salvageable. Lily and I don't speak every day, but we text. We check in about small things, a new bottle that worked well, a cute onesie sale. We both show up for Miles when it matters. We still have conversations about money, difficult ones, but instead of ultimatums, there are spreadsheets and accountability. I've learned to be gentle but firm, and she's learned that not getting everything she wants now doesn't devalue her happiness. As for the lawyers and the power of attorney theatrics, those are mostly in the rear view. We all agreed to mediation principles if disputes arise, and we signed a visitation agreement that protects Miles's best interest while allowing me consistent access. That paperwork felt like a small victory, prevention over cure. The bigger victory is that Lily finally asked in a humbled voice one afternoon, "Mom, I'm sorry for dragging this to the public like I did." I didn't demand apologies. I accepted it like the fragile olive branch it was. This story doesn't end in a dramatic courtroom showdown or a viral redemption arc. Ends in therapy appointments, babysitting afternoons, and the slow work of learning to trust again. I'll take the slow wins over the dramatic ones any day. Date: 6 months after the dinner with lawyers, life has settled into something quieter and steadier. Lily and Jason's wedding finally happened, intimate under string lights in a small community garden with a playlist that made everyone dance. They invited only close family and a handful of friends who'd supported them through the rough patch. I walked Lily down a short aisle and felt every year of my life folded into that step. Miles is now toddling and has discovered the peculiar joy of banging wooden spoons on every surface. He knows my name. He calls me Emmy in a way that melts whatever residual bitterness might be there. The visitation agreement held. We have a written plan for holidays that everyone respects. There are still tense moments, of course, like when Lily's mom anger flares and she says hurtful things. But we've learned to call a timeout and bring Claire, our mediator, into a session before raw words cause irreparable harm. I also learned to guard my own well-being. I kept going to therapy. I shaved my savings plan down to what I could realistically offer as a contribution and stuck to it. I learned that generosity is kinder when it's sustainable. I started a small weekend ritual with Miles. Pancakes on Saturday mornings, 2 songs from my childhood playlist, and a slow walk to the park. Those rituals have replaced the need for grand gestures. If there's a moral, and I'm not usually one for tidy morals, it's this: families morph and break and reforge in ways that are messy and human. Protecting your future isn't the same as withholding love. Sometimes the hardest thing you can do for the people you love is to say no when yes would be ruin. And when hurt follows, it's okay to make a plan, a lawyer, a mediator, and a willingness to show up in small, imperfect ways. That's how you build a life that survives the storms, and how you teach the next generation to build one too.